Hey guys, Gare here, and this is my latest booktube book haul video, and probably going to do 2 or 3 videos this week because I've got a lot to talk about with books this week, and I also may be doing a reading. And question that I want to ask this week is how many of you frequent and support independent slash used bookstores in your area? Do you have some in your area that you attend regularly, and how do you like them? How are they doing? Um, we got some bad news with Barnes and Noble recently that they're closing a lot of stores across the country, as I'm sure you've heard, and the town that I live in, we've actually lost several independent and used bookstores in the last several years, actually. So it is very sad to see. I don't think our local Barnes and Noble is slated to be closed just yet. They're still open. I think they have done some kind of a restructuring thing where they only use part-time people, and so sadly, I'm seeing some. I was just in there again yesterday, and I'm seeing some unfamiliar faces. So that makes me think, they've made some kind of structural change. But we do have a couple of. We have a giant used media store here in my town. It's a giant place where and you don't have to spend any money there if you don't want to or don't have any to spend. If you have old books, DVDs, CDs, video games, comic books, whatever that you want to trade, you can actually get trade credit there. And sometimes I do a comment. I don't get rid of very much because I don't really collect things unless I really have an enthusiasm for them and want to keep them. So I don't have a whole lot to get rid of, But I do. We do have a wonderful store that is an independent bookstore, and what's very nice and interesting about them is while they sell newer books, they also have a large section for used books, which they sell at a very reasonable and extremely low prices sometimes. I mean, sometimes for less than $1 each. But anyway, I've got quite a few to show, and so I'll get to them. All of these are used books that I got from the independent used bookstore, our local store here. And I encourage you to support these stores as much as possible. It looks like in the not too distant future, the chains may be gone, and the stores, the local independent smaller stores, may be all we have. Sad state of affairs. But anyway, I picked up Lives of the Poets by Michael Schmidt, and this, as you can see, is a very large, very comprehensive. Basically, it's a history of those of you who aren't familiar with this. It's basically a history of poetry. It's got like short chapters on this poet, this movement, that movement. Alexander Pope, John Gay, Jonathan Swift, Dr. Johnson, Methods and Madnesses, Liberty versus Legitimacy, Poetic Movements, Touch as a Memory, John Clare, William Cullen Bryant, John Keats, Thomas Lovell, Battles, right up until the modern age. And this is a fantastic book. I don't remember what I paid. It was like $3 or $4. It was incredibly inexpensive. A great book. I also got unbelievably cheap William Burroughs' Cities of the Red Night. And this was a fairly late career novel from Burroughs. I believe it came out in the late 70s. It seems like when it was published that I remember him in an interview in Rolling Stone, and it was just quite a colorful and interesting interview. But this, and I read this at the time. This book is actually quite collectible. I got this for less than $10, and it's just kind of an older paperback. It's a rather incredible cover, sort of Bosch-like, and I don't remember what the painting is. Maybe I can see it here, but I have seen this for quite a bit of money online before. And so, I mentioned to them just because, I know these people and I know they know their stuff who work there. And, I'm like, you can get quite a bit for this book, online. They were just kind of like, well, it's a good deal if you want it, take it. So I took it, you know. And so I read this many years ago, and now I have another copy of it. And Cities of the Red Knight, William Burroughs. It's a wild book. If you know anything about Burroughs, you know what I'm talking about. So check that out. Why did I get selected poems of W.H. Auden when I have numerous books of Auden's poetry, and I also have his collected poetry? I think because this is a very attractive, small edition, I immediately just memorial for the city. September 1st, 1939. The Hills, Achilles' Heel. It's not Achilles' Heel. It's the Shield of Achilles. And I'm immediately turned to poems of Auden's that I like. And I thought, well, I can carry this around. This will easily. The Collected is a very big, large, sort of Michael Schmidt Lives of the Poets volume. This is very small edition. It's almost a pocket size, and I can just carry this around with me in my tote, and take out Auden, read him whenever I like. I also, speaking of authors and their letters, I should do a video someday on authors' letters. I came across this. I didn't even know that this existed. I'm a huge movie buff, and a big fan of the French filmmaker Jean Renoir, who did Rules of the Game. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. I cannot believe The Golden Coach, Grand Illusion. A lot of movies, great movies that Renoir did from actually he started in the late silent era and continued making films right up till about 1960. This is his collected letters. This was literally I think 75 cents. And excuse me, I didn't know this book even existed. It was in excellent condition. I was very happy to get this. And as I'm thumbing through it, he's talking about working on this project and working on that project. And he's talking about, this is him while he was working on his Badouche Saved from Drowning. Was one of his movies that you've probably heard of. Just really drawing a blank. I should make notes before I do these videos. He came to America for a good period during the 1940s, during and after the war, and then he went back to France. And so, fascinating filmmaker. Watch his movies. I do recommend this book. I haven't read it all the way through. I'm reading it selectively, kind of skipping around, and then I'll go back and start reading it from the beginning. Why would I buy a copy of Donna Tartt's The Secret History? One of my favorite contemporary writers, The Secret History, when I already have The Secret History. I have my original copy that I bought in the early 90s when this book first came out. Well, because this was a very handsome, it's a beautiful cover, and it's a newish edition. I think it's probably just come out in the last few years. Since The Goldfinch came out and was such a huge success, which they're making a film of right now, by the way. Of course, they may be finished with principal photography right now, but I know there is a movie coming. And this is Book of the Month Club, special hardcover edition. And it's just such a beautiful copy. And, it was very inexpensive. I think $7 or $8. And I thought, well, why not? Maybe someday I can get her to sign these. Of course, Tartt is infamous for, people always say a book every 10 years. Actually, between The Little Friend and The Goldfinch, which was her last book that came out almost 5 years ago, It was 11 years. It was announced the year before, but then there was another announcement that it was not going to be until the following year that it came out. So I guess she wasn't quite ready with it. But, of course, there is The Secret History, which came out in the early 90s. The Little Friend, which came out, I think, in 2002. And then The Goldfinch, which was this monster success, won Tart the Pulitzer Prize, and which came out in 2013. So we're what 5, 6 years before Tart's next novel. If we can all hang on that long, and so and highly recommend this. Her books are wonderful. I think of the three books, The Secret History, The Little Friend, and The Goldfinch. I think The Little Friend is my favorite, and in part because I'm close to that character's age, and I just remember I was of that generation where, we were kids and, we still played outside. We played ball in each other's yards. We climbed trees. We explored old houses, old empty houses. We got into places we weren't supposed to be in. We were told by our parents, be home before dark. But you don't ever hear that anymore. And now the idea of kids being outside, riding bikes, cutting through yards, miles away from home is just anathema. I mean, that's unheard of, for good reasons, some of it. So, but anyway, it really reminded me of that period when I was a child. Dark Shadows is mentioned. My beloved Dark Shadows is mentioned in The Little Friend, I think a couple of times, very interestingly. But highly recommend the books of Donna Tartt, and read her, and hopefully I'll get to meet her someday and get my books by her signed. And I also another book that I didn't know that existed, The Letters of Dashiell Hammett. This is from 1921 to 1960, which was when Hammett died. Hammett, of course, was very famous for The Maltese Falcon, The Dane Curse. Am I going to draw a blank again? The Thin Man, of course. Red Harvest. There's one I'm forgetting. And he was actually went to jail for a while during the Red Scare of the 1950s, the McCarthy era, and is also famous for his relationship with the playwright Lillian Hellman. And this, again, is a very big, very comprehensive book. Guys, this was 25 cents. At first I thought, I don't know. It might be interesting to read about his correspondence with Hellman and to read about his letters, when he actually went into World War II, and he was not very healthy, and he was an older man. I think he was well into his 40s or maybe even early 50s. But, he it's what he wanted to do, and he felt that he should do, and just a fascinating figure, terrific writer. Once The Thin Man was out and made into movies, that pretty much was the end of his writing career. I think he struggled to write the rest of his life. He wrote a lot of short stories in the 1920s for the pulp magazines, detective stories, the Continental Ops stories. And then, of course, he wrote his 5 novels, and movies were made, but I didn't write very much after that at all. So this was, wherever you can get it, I would get this. Perhaps you could check it out from the library. But Dashiell Hammett, it says selected letters of Dashiell Hammett, so that's not all of them. But it's quite enough, I'm sure. I know a lot of you are fans of David Sedaris, as am I, and this paperback of When You Are Engulfed in Flames is a little rough, but it was literally like $2 or $3, and I don't think I have this, so I said, why not? The humorist. David Sedaris, who writes for The New Yorker, though not had very much in The New Yorker in recent years. Something pops up here and there, so I don't quite know why that is. Maybe he's just saving his essays for the first reads being in his books. But I got that. I enjoyed that very much. Getting down to the last couple of books, they're both big ones. Book I wanted for many, many, many years and finally managed to get it. And again, guys, I'm remembering I'm having trouble flipping this video, so I'm aware of and apologize for the graphics being backwards. So forgive me for that. I'm still trying to fix that. This computer is very old. I'm not technically inclined. I've tried a couple of things that have not worked, so I'll keep working on that. This is the correspondence between Richard Strauss and Hugo von Hofmannsthal, who were Strauss, of course, was the famous musical composer who wrote the Rosenkavalier, Elektra, the Four Last Songs, a lot of famous operas and musical pieces, and von Hofmannsthal was his lyricist. And this is a collection of their letters that go from about 1900 until the last one is, I think it's the late 20s. Yeah, it's like 1929, so about 30 years of letters of their working relationship. And I had read about this. I would read books about other people, and there would be some reference to a quote from this book, some reference to Strauss and von Hofmannsthal's correspondence, and so there it was. It was very inexpensive. I think I paid $3 for this, and so I finally have this book. And again, it's a big book. It's very comprehensive, and I have looked at it a little bit, and I'm going to enjoy that. And that's a permanent part of my collection. That's not a book that I'm ever going to part with. So really looking forward to this. And finally, the last book is another book that I've been wanting for several years, and it was just way too expensive, and I did stumble upon, it's a little rough, but I stumbled upon an affordable edition. This is Journey to the Abyss, The Diaries of Count Harry Kessler, 1880 to 1918, edited with an introduction by Laird M. Easton. Who was Harry Kessler? He had an Irish mother, a German father, was born into a very wealthy family in 1868. He began keeping a journal kind of on the cusp of adolescence, and this fascinating story because, well, first of all, I'll tell you a little bit more about who he was. But basically, he was a very wealthy man. He dabbled in the arts. He was in the military during World War I, and he knew everyone. He was famous for knowing everybody of the day. He met Nietzsche. As he was there when Nietzsche died, which is kind of incredible. He met Sarah Bernhardt. He knew a lot of the famous artists of his time, the musicians, the painters, the politicians. This era that we call the fin de cycle, or cycle, if I'm saying it correctly, which basically means end of a century, end of an epoch, a period, leading up, that affluent time of Germany and Europe, leading up to the First World War. And knew everyone, was very involved in the arts, and wrote these diaries. There is another book of his later years, and he died in 1937, and there's I think it's called Lights of Berlin, that was published in the early 70s, and it was thought that his early diaries, these decades of diaries, were lost. And this was published 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And the wonderful story is that he had I believe it was a safe deposit box that had a 50-year lease on it. It was kind of incredible. And the lease ran out. They maintain these things like this in Europe. I don't believe we really do this in the United States. But you know, the lease ran out. This was opened, and behold, there were the diaries of Count Harry Kessler. You know, that they were thought lost forever, and then they were edited, put together, and published in this. This copy's a little. This is paperback. It's a little rough. This is another book that's quite expensive to buy online. They had it for, because of the condition, it was $11, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so grabbing that. You know, so I just really very happy to get this. And there was a passage here. In fact, speaking of him knowing people, speaking of the previous book, Strauss and von Hofmannsthal, this is from 1899, March the 28th, Berlin. This is an entry. Hofmannsthal lunched with me. Later I went with him to see Demel and Pankow. We met there Richard Strauss and his wife, Scherbart, and Schaefer. I'm not sure who those people are. Over time, Hofmannsthal wears out his welcome with me. His vanity doesn't permit him to think that he could ever stay too long. So, and so there's a connection. So you see how these two books were of, you know, very similar era, and so it's not terribly surprising that they would reference each other. But Kessler actually was the had the story idea, I guess you would say, for Der Rosenkavalier, the opera of course, written by Strauss and von Hofmannsthal. And I think there was a little bit of a falling out because he felt he wasn't given due credit for it. But fascinating book. I've been looking through this as well, and you know, I would highly recommend this as well. And so hopefully I'll be able to flip this, and these you know, graphics will be a lot clearer. So anyway, just wanted to share with you my independent used bookstore haul, and ask you to please subscribe, please share this video, particularly in book groups that you may have online, be a part of, and please tell me how you use, tell me about the independent bookstores in your area and how you use them, if you use them, and how are they doing? Are they faring pretty well? Are they struggling? It's very sad to me what's happening to booksellers in this country and right now, and it's not a, you know, it's not a very good reflection on us how we're doing. So, but people love books. I believe that somehow or other books will continue to thrive, but we have to help make it happen. We have to support both the chains and the you know, the smaller booksellers. So anyway, I'll be doing a couple of other videos this week. I think one of them is short reading and another, you know, book haul video. So until then, I hope everybody's doing fantastic, and I thank you for watching very much, and I will speak to you soon.